It's Wednesday, it's 11:30 and we're live in Brighton ahead of Keir Starmer's speech to conference, where he'll tell the Labour faithful that the party is back in business. Joining me, Shadow Foreign Secretary Lisa Nandy and the New Statesman's political editor Stephen Bush. We're here on the final day of Labour's conference as Keir Starmer prepares to deliver his first speech to his party in person. As well as talking to the faithful here in Brighton, he'll try to persuade the voters he can be the next Prime Minister.
This is his first opportunity to talk to the nation, and people will tune in.
After a week of infighting, he'll have a clear message for his critics on the left.
You need unity to win. People don't vote for divided parties.
What's more important to you, unity or winning?
Winning. Winning a general election.
He'll speak in about half an hour's time. We'll bring it to you live, of course, and a little later on, we'll speak to his deputy, Angela Rayner. So welcome to the conference centre here in Brighton. Another beautiful sunny day. It's a big moment and a big day for Keir Starmer, the Labour leader. Let's kick off and show you some of those classic pictures that we get every conference in person of the leader of the party preparing for his speech. There is Keir Starmer, a moment of quiet reflection here at his conference hotel in Brighton, there with that glorious backdrop of the sea. And, of course, as always, the pressure will be on him to deliver. Lisa, Keir Starmer has put an awful lot of stock in appearing in person. The first time since he became leader, because, of course, it was in the pandemic. So, I mean, the expectations will be enormously high about what he's got to do.
Well, the expectations are always enormously high for a Labour leader speech. It's the centrepiece of our conference. But this is a big deal for us. This is the first moment in 18 months when he's been able to speak directly to the country about the sort of country we can be. And he does so in the middle of petrol shortages, key workers not being able to get to work. We've lurched from one crisis to another as a country. And Keir is stepping into this moment to say directly to people, look, we can be a better country than this with a better government. And that's the vision that Labour has to offer the country.
Right. Has he raised the stakes almost too high, though, with this idea that you're actually going to see me in person, not over Zoom, and somehow he's going to do something different in terms of that connection?
Yeah, I think perhaps he has a bit, not least because one of the problems is that Labour have been very grateful in some ways to the energy crisis, because it's meant they've had this quite fraught internal rule fight away from public eye. Well, now, actually, it feels unlikely he's going to get much attention for this speech, having raised a lot of expectations that he would do so. Right,
well, that's interesting, because if it is a big moment, it is the sort of make or break, to use all those cliches. What's he actually got to do, then, Stephen? What will be the metric of success?
I think the metric of success for him is something which gives Labour a sense of a theme and a direction, right? They've had a lot of policies this week, but it's still not really clear what they all cohere together, and that, I think, is the missing piece.
Right, is that the narrative missing?
It's a story about the sort of country we can be. I think Stephen's exactly right, that people want to hear from him, not he personally feels so invested in the future of the country, but the sort of country that we can build together. And he started to set that out. There'll be a test on this later in a very long Fabian pamphlet published last week. But the big idea, the sort of theme around that, is that people have a contribution to make to the future of this country. People
he put that in his essay, didn't he?
People should have a stake in it again, because if you go around the country, if you come to Wigan, you will find people who are so ambitious for the future of our country, but they don't have a government that can match that level of ambition. They want to contribute, they want to be part of that change, and that's what Keir's going to be talking about today.
All right, well, this is a good moment to remind you of other former Labour leaders' first speeches and memorable moments that you've all been waiting for. A warning that some of the clips do contain flash photography.
Oh, bless your
They are the enemy.
I want you with me, head and heart.
I'm proud to be British. I believe in British values.
Let me scotch a myth about David and me right away.
You might have noticed in some of the newspapers they've taken a bit of an interest in me.
You know, I've been in this job for just 3 months. And when people say to me, would you recommend this job to anyone else? I say, not yet. They are the enemy. They must be defeated, and we must defeat them together. That is our purpose. There must be no activity in this Labour movement that is superior to that purpose.
I'll never forget the day I stole his football. And you know, he was so angry with me, he nationalised my train set.
Just because I've become the leader of this party, I'm not going to stop standing up on those issues or being that activist.
New Labour, New Britain.
I will always stand up for you.
So, extracts there of the first speeches made by former Labour leaders when they made their first conference outing. There was a slight theme going through those parts of those speeches, Lisa, in a sense that it's an opportunity for leaders to face their demons, isn't it? And stamp their authority on the party. Is this going to be about Keir Starmer burying Corbynism once and for all?
This is about showing the country that we've changed. If you came to this Labour conference a couple of years ago, you would have seen, as I did, a party more interested in itself than what was happening to people out in the country, congratulating ourselves about the very many policies that we had on offer to the public. None of that really resonating with the public because we simply weren't trusted to govern. We've had these big moments at conference this week. You know, you say that we're squabbling about rule changes. I say that we're welcoming Louise Ellman, a Jewish Labour MP who was forced out of the party in recent years,
Louise
back
Ellman.
to this party because we have changed. We've closed the door on that chapter where anti-Semitism was allowed in our party. We've closed the door on being more interested in ourselves than winning an election and changing people's lives. So this is a big moment for Keir because that's what he's done this week and he's shown the country that he can do it. He's changed Labour so that we can look outwards and start to change this country.
Right, well, we're just showing the picture there of Keir Starmer embracing Louise Ellman, who quit about 2 years ago over the issue of anti-Semitism, a Jewish Labour MP at the time. I saw her myself here. She's very pleased to be back. There's no doubt about it at all. But you can see from what you've said, you didn't mention Jeremy Corbyn there by name, but that's what you mean, isn't it? Ending that era.
I think there's been a real sense during that era that we just weren't standing up for people. And this is about Labour coming home to them. I said in 2019, when I stood in Wigan, re-elected, but amidst a sea of blue, that I would make it my mission to bring Labour home to the people who felt they couldn't trust us again. And Keir Starmer has gone out this week and shown that he can do that. He can change the Labour Party, and now he's looking outwards to the country to speak directly to the people of this country for the first time, to say, we've closed the door on that chapter, Labour has changed, and you can trust us again to govern.
I'll come to you, Stephen, about closing that chapter. But you can see why the left of the party are annoyed then this week.
Well, look, there are people who want us to stay the same. There are people who want the status quo. And I just say to them very directly, you're wrong. You're wrong to say that we should be more interested in ourselves than what's happening to people in this country. We've got major, major problems, a mental health crisis, people waiting years to get access to treatment on the NHS, this massive backlog that we had even before COVID, and key workers on their knees trying to deal with it. This country needs a plan.
Right.
We can't just keep lurching from crisis to crisis, and that means we don't just need a Labour opposition, we need a Labour alternative.
So it is OK to break the pledges that Keir Starmer has made, important cornerstone pledges on things like backing public ownership, which he stood on a platform when he became leader. You will remember that very clearly. You can see that he is moving away from the very things that got him elected by many on the left.
But look, we have a vision for the future of this country in which people have a stake. That means pulling more power back into people's hands.
Right.
But what
did you not believe that then?
No, we absolutely believe that the wealth and the power in this country should be shared far more equally in order that we can be a better country. But that doesn't mean signing up to pledge after pledge when you have no ability or plan to actually realise it. That's what Boris Johnson does. That's not what we do. When we come out and make a promise, we keep it.
Although, of course, Keir Starmer has criticised Boris Johnson for breaking all sorts of manifesto pledges.
But that's what I mean. Boris Johnson says he'll do things and then he doesn't deliver. We are going to show this country that when we say we'll do something, we'll mean it and we'll work with them to actually deliver it.
Stephen?
Well, what Lisa, of course, is far too polite and loyal to say is in many ways we are seeing the argument of that leadership election playing itself out again, which is the argument of people around Keir was you had to say certain things to win the leadership election and then move the party. The argument that some other candidates made was you had to be fronting up with the party about the change they had to make. It is a question of can you do the movement Keir is now trying to pull off and not come across as shifty and sort of rootless.
Right. I mean, we're not expecting Keir Starmer to mention Jeremy Corbyn by name. I mean, Lisa didn't specifically then in that conversation. But his presence will loom large throughout the speech, won't it?
Yeah, he is the subtext of a lot of what they're doing, right? These rule changes give power back to the PLP, having seen it taken away from them under Corbyn. These rule changes, which deal with difficulties around anti-Semitism. Again, all of this is about the Corbyn legacy, but without the word Corbyn actually being used.
Has the chapter been closed? Have they moved on, the party, in the way Lisa said?
Well, they've clearly made a big step in terms of the rule changes, but there's a long way to go, I think.
Right. I mean, there was talk, Lisa, this morning that some on the left could actually break away from the party, so angry are they. Keir Starmer said in a BBC interview that winning is more important than party unity. But John McDonnell's right, the former Shadow Chancellor, in saying disunited parties don't win elections.
Well, I agree that disunited parties don't win elections, but if John is arguing that we can carry on the way that we have been for the last few years, I think he's living on another planet, frankly. When you look at what's happening to people in this country, it is not good enough to stand at the sidelines with a placard and protest rather than going out directly to the people of this country with a plan for how you're going to change things and with the honesty and integrity to be able to convince them that you will stick to those promises and you'll actually deliver real change in people's lives.
Should they just leave then? I mean, should they just form that breakaway party?
Well, look, I mean, I'd like people to stay in the party. I'd like people to stay with us. But at the end of the day, we are changing. We've taken a huge step forward, as Stephen acknowledged this week. We are changing. We are closing the door on that chapter, and we are looking towards the future. That's what people expect from us in the country, and we're going to rise to that challenge.
All right. Well, let's stick with Stephen. Stephen, this headline in the Times newspaper, this is Starmer's new rules will stop any chance of a Corbyn comeback. Explain to us what's going on here.
Well, so the important thing about these rule changes is they make it much harder to unseat sitting Labour MPs, having made it a lot easier, which meant they had a huge fear of, getting got rid of by their membership. So the argument is not just about what this means for the decision to bring back Corbyn. It's Labour MPs who felt very nervous, and if they step out of line with their activists, they're going to be in trouble, will now feel more confident and able to put forward what they see as the best way for Labour to win and for Labour to run itself.
Right, Lisa. So has the door closed on Jeremy Corbyn's chances of becoming an MP again? A Labour MP? Well,
look, I've said for a long time that if Jeremy apologises, then my understanding is that he'll get the whip back, and he hasn't done so. And I'm sorry about that because, frankly, to be really honest, I don't want to talk about Jeremy Corbyn anymore. I want to talk about the people of this country and the change that they need, and it would be really helpful if we could just move on from that. I mean, we've got a big agenda that we announced this week on mental health and making sure that people can get access to treatment. On education, we've got a crisis across this country of children who've been out of learning for a very long time. Some of them in this great digital divide without access to the data, the laptops that they needed. We've got to start investing in the people of this country, and that means talking less about ourselves and our former leaders and talking far more about that.
All right, well, let's listen to a bit of an interview that was done with the General Secretary of the GMB Union. Let's hear it.
So we don't want vague promises for Labour. We need firm commitments and we need a plan for jobs. Too much of the stuff this week has been insipid. We'd like to see things far firmer because that's what's going to generate support in working class communities again for Labour.
I mean, Lisa, Gary Smith there saying insipid. That's not a word that you would want to associate with your leader, would you? And also, you know, that was the leader of the union, wanted you to be Labour leader instead of Keir Starmer. Does he have a point?
No, Gary's a great friend of mine, and he fights for his members and he fights for decent jobs across the country, as I do, which is why we work so closely during the leadership contest. But I agree with him. I don't want to see something insipid. And what's even more important is that Keir agrees with him as well. What we're going to do is go out and seek the trust of the people to govern again by creating those good jobs in communities that have seen none. So on Monday, for example, Rachel Reeves, our Shadow Chancellor, stood in the hall and announced a major investment plan around greening Britain. Now, that is about creating good jobs in places like Barnsley, Wigan, Aberdeenshire, where we've seen those jobs lost over recent years, so that this generation can power us through the next 100 years as their parents and grandparents powered us through the last. That is the sort of ambition that people like Gary have for this country, and it's the sort of thing that you're going to hear Keir Starmer setting out today.
It's a pretty damning word, though, insipid, isn't it, to be used by Gary Smith. I mean, he may have been talking about the agenda, but the implication is so is Keir Starmer.
Yeah, it is. And one of the interesting things is now that the Labour Party's sort of establishment, for lack of a better word, is not worried about a return to the Corbyn era, you're going to see people like Gary Smith, who are by no means Corbynites, who feel more able to go, look, actually, I have problems with this leadership, because they're no longer tied to Keir Starmer, thinking if I lose him, we'll end up with something worse. So it's weird how, in the paradox is, Keir is in a stronger position institutionally, and that means you're going to start seeing people who were otherwise quite worried about what would happen if he was got rid of, feeling able to assert themselves in a way he won't necessarily enjoy.
But what about passion? What about having fire in your belly? You know, we've seen and heard Angela Rayner, who sort of demonstrates that. Obviously, she was very controversial in the comments that she made about the Tory government. But does he need to inspire, literally, in his personal style?
I think Keir Starmer is not ever going to be someone who causes people to kind of jump up and get excited. I think if there's a way for him to win over the country, it will be by actually leaning into the fact that he is, you know, a dull and respectable. Yeah, he's interesting personally. I get it. He's a fun conversationalist, sort of, but you know, he's you know, steady hand on the tiller, all of that kind of thing.
You're laughing away there. What are you laughing at exactly?
Well, actually, I was laughing. I just bumped into him on the way in here. He was coming down the stairs in the hotel down the road, and he was looking pretty relaxed and said he was in jeans, and he said to me, "I'm just off to get the train home." It was a joke, I think, although tune in. I
was going to say, I do hope so.
You know, he is a fun guy, but the more important thing about him is that he's really, really decent. He has honesty and integrity, and he thinks about what he's doing, plans it out, and takes care with things that can deeply affect people's lives. The contrast between him and the Prime Minister that we currently have couldn't be bigger. And I think as we emerge from the pandemic, if people are looking for a country that has a plan that can actually be delivered with some safety and security and care for the circumstances of their lives, then Keir Starmer is absolutely the man to do it.
Well, let's get a sense of that, if there is any indeed, from voters, and talk to Joe Twyman from the pollsters Delta poll. Joe, what do voters think of him at the moment, Keir Starmer?
Well, there is a perception that he is a safer pair of hands, that he is analytical, that he is thoughtful, but at the same time, there's a perception that he doesn't have the kind of, I guess you characterise it as charisma that Boris Johnson has. And so these are both advantages and disadvantages for him. But the most important thing is that really, throughout his leadership, he hasn't had an opportunity to really resonate with the voters because it's been such an unusual situation in public opinion terms. And so really, it's not about how he's performed over the last 12 months rather that's important. It's how he performs over the next 12 months as we emerge out of COVID and the public starts to think about things beyond the coronavirus pandemic. And so when the discussion moves to the economy, when the discussion moves back to Brexit, education, taxation, all of these things, that's where Keir Starmer can really start to make an impact. Because so far, for obvious reasons, he hasn't had the kind of opportunity that previous Labour leaders have had during their first year as leader.
Joe Twyman, thank you very much. Just to sort of summarise for you, Lisa, safe pair of hands, what voters think. They haven't seen him problem because of the pandemic. They sort of accept that to a certain extent. They do want to see what's going to happen, obviously, over the next 12 months. He will have to make an impact. Is that where you think he is? I think that for the first time in 11 years since I've been a Member of Parliament, we've got a candidate
for Prime Minister that people believe could actually be Prime Minister. And that's no criticism of the people who went before. You know, I served under 2 leaders who worked extremely hard to convince the public. But I think people are open to the prospect of Keir Starmer, and that's why today is a big moment for us, because they want to know more, they're interested to know more. The door is open. And I tell you, in 2019, when our entire Labour base collapsed in every nation and region of the UK, when we lost seats that we'd held for 100 years, I wasn't sure if we would get to that point. So to be sitting here today, 2 years later, where the public are open, they're interested, sure, we've got to go out and convince them, and we're absolutely going to do that with every fibre of our being. But to be here at this moment
on the
feels like
Politics Live set.
An astonishing transformation. And to be on the Politics Live set, of course, I mean, what could top it?
Well, absolutely, topping off conference. Listen, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much.
Thanks
Lisa Nandy, Shadow Foreign Secretary, go into the hall. Actually, all the queues outside, they've obviously all gone in, they're all ready and waiting. Stephen, has Keir Starmer, has Labour actually capitalised enough on the crisis that is facing the government and the country in terms of the petrol pump crisis?
I actually think yes, because they did need, in terms of Keir Starmer's project, to get these rule changes through. It makes sense to have aired their dirty laundry at a moment when we're not paying attention because we're much more worried about the petrol crisis. The problem they've had is that's been having to sacrifice the opportunity to really make blows on the government. So they'll have to hope that the advantage is that they can bank the benefits of the rule changes, really.
Right. I mean, in that sense, we can show, actually, our viewers the Daily Mail front page. Amid petrol panic and lorry driver crisis, Boris in a battle to save Christmas. This would be an ideal opportunity, wouldn't it, to make hay for Keir Starmer?
Well, I kind of think the hay makes itself, really. Like the government either gets its act together and fixes the problem, in which case they'll be re-elected. In that case, it's exactly like the fuel crisis back in 2000, right? That would have been an opportunity for the Conservatives if Labour hadn't got a grip. But it's not really, I think, something where the opposition is actually really a power player in its own right. So I think it actually makes sense for them to have done this very painful fight. So they hope, fit for the future.
Right. I'm going to welcome the BBC's political editor, Laura Kuenssberg. Hello to you. We're going to start, actually, by showing some more pictures of Keir Starmer. We saw him preparing for his speech in the hotel room, and he was lucky with the weather because it's sunny, and he's walking with his wife, Victoria, along the seafront. We know, of course, that these pictures can be fraught with danger, can't they, on the day of a big speech?
They certainly can. I think there are lots of people in the hall here today who remember Neil Kinnock's adventure on the beach back in the 1980s. And actually, there was quite a lot of chat here last night, too, of comparisons with that kind of era when you saw a Labour leader who was, you know, respected by the party, but people weren't necessarily rapturously persuaded by his personal charisma, but who had to face down the left and who had to do it, though, repeatedly. So Keir Starmer's team this morning feel really happy with how the last few days have gone, even though that might sound strange given how bumpy it's been, and there's been a lot of criticism from the left. But they feel that he's been able to show who's boss, you know, he got through his rule changes. But they also expect it's quite likely there might be some heckling, there might be a bit of protest in the hall. So they've actually prepped him for that.
Well, that's amazing, isn't it, that he is almost sort of prepared, if you like, for that to happen. In that vein, we have spoken already directly about Jeremy Corbyn. He does loom large at this conference.
Absolutely.
We're just going to show you and our viewers this clip from David Evans, actually, the General Secretary of the Labour Party. Now, he was addressing the hall, addressing delegates, and he asked them a question I think he wasn't quite expecting the response that came.
Everybody remembers why they joined Labour. What was it for you? For me, Jeremy Corbyn. Well,
quite what David Evans was expecting there, that Jeremy Corbyn was the reason that many of them joined the Labour Party.
That's right, and I think we'd be pretty sure that's not the reason that David Evans joined the Labour Party. I mean, he was, I think, the Deputy Secretary of the party back, I think, in 2000. So he was a sort of veteran of, you know, that era when you saw the Blair operation really squeezing the left, really pushing them out, really excluding them. But that was already after a very, very long fight. So while Keir Starmer's team have, you know, they think they have had a good week, they also know very well that that pressure is not over, it's not gone. Just because they got some rule changes through this week, it doesn't mean that suddenly the tensions and divisions in the party aren't going to be there for all to see in the years to come. That is what happens in the Labour Party. But the real hope in Keir Starmer's team today is that actually the wider public, and dare I say it, not our lovely viewers just on Politics Live, but the wider public who don't obsess about politics and enjoy the debate in the way that you all do, actually take a look. Take a look at him. And it might sound trite to say it, but it is one of those few days in the whole of the year where opposition leaders can be sure that they're going to get, you know, a good chunk of airtime on television news bulletins that are watched far beyond the normal political audience. Wonderful as it is, and however much we all enjoy
Wonderful
the
and
debate.
large and interested, of course. Well, we're going to
Yeah.
test the temperature of delegates here at the conference. Adam Fleming, our chief political correspondent, has been talking to them.
Well, here's something we haven't seen for a while. A giant room filled with people expectantly waiting for a real-life speech. Let's see what they're actually waiting for. Hi, guys. What's it like being in this environment after so long?
It's fantastic. It's great to see all the people together. I think the conference has been fantastic. I think Keir's done a great job at the fringe events too. Keir's been absolutely fantastic. Lots of great speeches and, yeah, just a really great atmosphere.
We always say these things are make or break. Is this make or break?
Absolutely not, no. There's plenty of time to show how incompetent the Tory government are, so I'm looking forward to what he's got to say.
Is there stuff you want to find out about Keir Starmer as a person?
Yeah, interested to find out about him and what his views on things are, but to hear him speak live is a really exciting thing, instead of behind a screen and stuff like that, so yeah, looking forward to it.
Do you think he's got the showbiz qualities that you need to do a barnstorming platform speech?
Hope so. We've been really surprised by some MPs' speeches this week that have been really great, really exciting and really motivating, and want to leave here feeling the same way today. So, yeah, good luck to him.
Okay, this is the feeling you get from activists on the eve of one of these speeches. Everyone's very on message.
Haha, on message. Of course they are when they're talking to you, Adam. I mean, no sign of anybody about to heckle Keir Starmer at that particular point.
No.
But obviously, that was only a smattering of people in all. They're buoyed, of course.
Yeah, I think people are buoyant, and actually, I think in a funny way as well, this gathering happening at all after COVID, and I suspect we'll see a flavour of that too at the Conservative conference next week. I think for political parties, actually, just being able to get together.
It makes a huge
It
difference.
makes a huge difference. And I think also we've seen that, I think, from the Labour leader as well. I think being able to be with members, being able to feel that, you know, actually he is going to be the guy on the stage. He is going to be on the lectern. We asked him yesterday if he was nervous about today.
Yeah,
and he said, no, I'm really looking forward to it. Now, I don't necessarily believe he might not have a touch of nerves, but it was interesting. I think that actually opportunity of interacting has been really important.
Well, there's Lisa Nandy, who was just sitting here, the Shadow Foreign Secretary. It really is full in there. It is amazing, actually, to see so many people gathered in one particular place with all the delegates there. That issue of a potential heckle, how difficult would that be?
Well, I think it's the kind of thing a competent operation is prepared for. In Tom Watson's conference speech in 2017, his team prepared him 8 heckle responses, and in the end, I think he only needed 3. So,
quite disappointed. Yeah. Have the opportunity to use them all.
I won't ask you to remind us of what they all were. That is something in terms of preparation.
Yeah, so you'd assume Keir Starmer's team will probably have at least 8 prepared for him as well.
Right, and what about the sort of personal? We reminded viewers of other Labour leaders' first speeches. How much of it is about them?
I think a lot of it's about them, right? No one knew in 2019 that we'd have a pandemic, all of the various events that happen, and we don't know what's going to happen in the rest of the Parliament. So I think a large part of elections is people buying the guy in Downing Street, or the girl in Downing Street in some instances. Obviously, Labour hasn't managed to quite get that far yet, but I think it does therefore really matter to sell Keir Starmer as a person, because he is the product.
Right. Well, what about that in terms of him, the person?
Well, I think it does matter, as Stephen said. We know it matters to voters.
It matters a lot.
It matters a lot, of course it does. And as does policy, as does the party. But it does matter a lot. And especially when you think of 2 particular things. Jeremy Corbyn was personally a huge attraction for thousands upon thousands of Labour members.
But he used to love those rallies, didn't he? Standing outside.
Absolutely. And his personality was absolutely key to how he managed to get the party, many people in the party, so excited. So there's that kind of legacy, that sort of thing hanging over Keir Starmer, that pressure to sort of up his personality pool. But he's also up against someone, love or loathe him, with a huge personality of Boris Johnson. And just getting some of the oxygen in that room is a real challenge.
Right.
So showing a bit more personality is something his allies want him to do. Whether he can do, well, that's one of the big tests.
Just to say there, that's the auditorium, all the Their feet cheering Doreen Lawrence there, close friend of Keir Starmer. She's going to be introducing the video that is traditional at the annual party conference ahead of the Labour leader's speech, and then she'll be welcoming Keir Starmer to the stage himself. We understand he's going to speak for about an hour. Is there going to be a surprise, do you think, Stephen, in terms of policy?
Yeah, I think, they've clearly briefed a lot of stuff beforehand, but they'll want something else for the headlines, something that people will talk about afterwards. So, yeah, there'll be another rabbit in there. There always is. Right?
I mean, the rabbit, of course, earlier in the week was Rachel Reeves's big announcement on
climate.
Absolutely, on climate. I don't know whether that will be a similar vein in terms of any surprises from Keir Starmer.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was in the same kind of area, because, clearly the climate policy is something that is becoming every day, every week, every month, much more important, much more significant, both at Westminster and also in voters' minds. And that big promise from Rachel Reeves, that was a really big deal. That's a lot of money, a huge impact that they would hope for, and a big long-term big long-term commitment. So I wouldn't be surprised if that is the area where Keir Starmer also makes some kind of commitment. But I don't think today is going to be a sort of encyclopedic
right, it's not going to be a list of
no. I don't think it's going to be that kind of speech. I do think, though, there will be something in there, and I also suspect there'll be something that addresses the very serious issues that are happening in the country right now. I mean, a criticism has been laid at Labour this week for not managing to capture the sort of zeitgeist in terms of what's going on at petrol stations, what's going on in terms of people's concerns about their energy bill, what's going on with key workers who are not able to get to work because they've got stuck in a queue trying to fill up their car. So I wonder if he might address that somehow, because it's not been a focus here. And some people would say they've missed a trick.
Do you think actually the big announcement by Rachel Reeves to some extent got lost a little bit in the sort of infighting and criticism from the left? It didn't quite make the impact it could have done.
I think it did get a bit lost, I mean, Andy McDonald, who was the Shadow Employment Minister, he resigned at 5:30. She gave her speech. It was a very, very busy afternoon. And of course, it got people talking here. And of course, it was covered. And there was, it sucked up some of the room, of course.
All right. I mean, Stephen, one of the things that Laura says is it probably won't be, and it never really is, a list of policy announcements, unless we're really rather close to when we expect a general election to take place. But earlier in the week, I spoke to Emily Thornberry, a member of the Shadow Cabinet, saying, it's unfair to make Labour produce figures, precise figures, when it comes to the big issues like the economy. Do you think that's true, or do you think if they need to be trusted by voters again, they do need to explain a little bit more about those big issues, which would flow from things like the petrol crisis?
I think they need to set out clear principles of what they're for and against, because ultimately we don't know what the world in 2024 will be like, but we should at least have some sense of how they might respond.
I think that is fair enough. I think that actually voters aren't right now probably, well, who knows, possibly 2.5 years from an election. People aren't sitting at home saying, I really want to know what Labour's spreadsheets would look like, and also this huge uncertainty about what the economy will look like. There will be another, probably 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 fiscal events, to use that terrible jargon, before we get to another election campaign. But certainly there has been pressure on them to spell out some more plans, and they have done a fair bit of that this week. There has been some new policy, which Keir Starmer hopes will address the criticism that they don't tell anybody what they're doing. But there are holes there, for sure.
All right, Laura, we're going to let you go, because I think we're only moments away from when Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, is going to stand up in that hole. As I say, the video is playing now. He'll then be welcomed by Doreen Lawrence to the stage, to the lectern, where we understand he will speak for probably about an hour to that packed hall. Afterwards, we will obviously get reaction for you, and we will hear from the Deputy Leader, Angela Rayner. That relationship, Stephen, while we're waiting for Keir Starmer, how would you describe it between Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner, his Deputy Leader? I mean, they couldn't be more different.
Yeah, well, the weird thing is they couldn't be more different personally. They're, of course, politically from broadly the same bit of the Labour Party, right? They're both from what we'd call the centre of the Labour Party, the soft left, the middle bit of the Labour Party. But personally, of course, they are a bit chalk and cheese. And I think one of the reasons that they have a lot of tensions is they often sort of almost talk past one another.
Do you think they've actually got over some of the difficulties, despite what she said earlier in this week about the Tory government, which certainly upset a lot of people here?
Yep. Now, I think one of the problems is there's still not very much trust in that relationship. Although, supporters of Angela Rayner would quite rightly point out that she has delivered for him on a variety of quite controversial rule changes, not just this week, but in the past.
All right, we're going to pause at this moment, because here is Keir Starmer walking up to the lectern. This is his first in-person conference speech, Brighton 2021.
Thank you so much, conference. I've waited 17 months, 25 days and 2 hours to appear in front of you in this hall as leader of our great party. And Doreen, thank you for your kind words. Thank you for everything you've done for criminal justice. Thank you for everything you've done for our party. I'm so proud to call you my friend. Thank you, Doreen. And conference, let me take this first opportunity to thank my brilliant Shadow Cabinet and Shadow Lords team for everything that they have done in the last 18 months. Thank you so much, colleagues. And Louise Ellman, welcome home. This hasn't always been an easy conference. Sunday was particularly nerve-wracking, but then the results started coming through. Arsenal 3, Tottenham 1. Conference, before I start, let me tackle the issue of the day head-on. If you go outside and walk along the seafront, it won't be long before you get to a petrol station that's got no fuel. Level up, you can't even fill up. And conference, doesn't that just tell you everything you need to know about this government? Ignoring the problem, blaming someone else, then coming up with a half-baked solution. Why do we suddenly have a shortage of HGV drivers? Why is there no plan in place? A tank of fuel already costs £10 more than it did at the start of the year. Gas and electricity bills up. Gaps in the supermarket shelves. Rent up, especially for those on the lowest incomes. Yet this is the very moment the government is putting up tax on working people, putting up tax on small business, and shamefully slashing universal credit, the lifeline for 6 million families. We have a fuel crisis, a pay crisis, a goods crisis, and a cost of living crisis all at the same time. Conference, let me quote to you what the Prime Minister said at the United Nations last week. We believe that someone else will clear up the mess we make because that's what someone else has always done. Well, Prime Minister, either get a grip or get out of the way and let us step up and clear up this mess. This is our first full conference since the 2019 general election, in which we suffered our worst defeat since 1935. To our devoted activists, to our loyal voters, I want to say loud and clear, you saved this party from obliteration, and we will never forget it. Thank you. But my job as leader is not just to say thank you to the voters that stayed with us. It is to understand and to persuade the voters who rejected us. To those Labour voters who said their grandparents would turn in their graves, but they couldn't trust us with high office. To those who reluctantly chose the Tories because they didn't believe that our promises were credible. To the voters that thought we were unpatriotic or irresponsible, or that we looked down on them. I say these simple but powerful words. We will never, under my leadership, go into an election with a manifesto that is not a serious plan for government. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. It will not take another election defeat for the Labour Party to become an alternative government in which you can trust. And conference, that's why it's been so important to get our own house in order this week, and we have done that. This is a... At this time on a Wednesday, it's normally the Tories that are heckling me. Doesn't bother me then. Won't bother me now. This is a big moment in our country's history. We will look back at this moment and we'll ask, how did the nation rebuild after the pandemic? Did we learn? Did we use the crisis to make the future? I see a government lost in the woods with two paths beckoning. One path leads back where we came from. None of the lessons of COVID are learned. The flaws that were brutally exposed by the pandemic all worsen. Childhood poverty increases. The crisis in social care gets worse. The housing market still broken. Slow and steady decline. But there's another path down which we do address the chronic problems revealed by COVID with the kindness and the togetherness that got us through. That path leads to a future in which a smart government enlists the brilliance of scientific invention to create a prosperous economy and a contribution society in which everyone has their role to play. It will be a future in which we make an opportunity out of tackling the climate crisis, and in which Britain is once again a confident actor in the world. I believe in this country, and I believe we will go forward. Today, I want to tell you how. Today, I want to tell you where my passions were born and why I'm in politics. There are two rocks in my life, the two sources of what I believe to be right and good: family and work. I'm not from a privileged background. My dad was a tool maker, although in a way, so was Boris Johnson's. My dad was a tool maker in a factory and worked on the shop floor all his life. He gave me a deep respect for the dignity of work. There are some lines from Auden that capture the beauty of skilled work. You need not see what someone is doing to know if it's his vocation. You only have to watch his eyes. How beautiful it is, that eye on the object look. I saw that eye on the object look in my dad. The pride that good work brings. It puts food on the table, and it provides a sense of dignity. So when I hear that this country is creating so many low-paid jobs, and when I tell you that good work and fair growth will be the priority for a Labour government, I haven't learnt this in some political seminar. I learnt it around the kitchen table. I learnt it at home from my dad. How pride derives from work. How work is the bedrock of a good economy. And how a good economy is an essential partner of a good society. That is why I am so proud to lead a party whose name is Labour. Don't forget it. Don't forget it. Labour, the party of working people. My mum worked incredibly hard too. She was a nurse in the NHS, and a very proud nurse too. I got from my mum an ethic of service. But my mum was also, unfortunately, a long-term patient of the NHS. When she was young, she was diagnosed with Still's disease. It's a rare form of inflammatory arthritis which severely restricts mobility. This disease, along with the drugs she had to take to control it, took a very heavy toll. The NHS, that had been her livelihood, became her lifeline. There were times, many times, when Mum was so ill that she had to go into hospital. I remember going into the intensive care unit one day, as I often did. Mum's bed was a riot of tubes and temperature devices. I could sense the urgency in the conversations of the 4 nurses on my mum's bed. I knew, without being told, they were keeping her alive. I can hardly convey to you the emotion of seeing your mum in that condition. And there was a sort of horrible irony in the moment. I'd just picked up an award for work I'd done on the death penalty, which in my own way was about trying to save people's lives. I'd gone to the hospital hoping to tell my mum about it. And there, in front of me, those 4 nurses were working to save her life. When that long day was over, I thanked them for what they'd done. And they said to me, "We're just doing our job." And they were. They were doing their job for my mum that night, somebody else's mum the night before, somebody else's mum the night after. But that's not just a job, it's a calling. So when I think of the extraordinary dedication of doctors and nurses working to keep people alive as the COVID virus took hold, I know what that looks like. I understand what that means. So just as we stood on our doorsteps and applauded, let this conference ring out its approval to the NHS staff, truly the very best of us. Thank you, Conference. So, you see, shouting slogans or changing lives, Conference. Thank you, Conference. Thank you, Conference. So you see, family life taught me about the dignity of work and the nobility of care. Conference, as I say, slogans or changing lives. Slogans we can chant all day. We can chant all day. But conference, even with a name like Keir, I was never one of those people reared for politics. I became the first person in my family to go to university. The first to go into the law. And every day as a lawyer, if you're a young radical as I was, you think of yourself as working for justice. You see people getting a raw deal and you want to help. Justice, for me, was not a complicated idea. Justice to me, was a practical achievement. It was about seeing a wrong and putting it right. That's my approach in politics too. Down to earth, working out what's wrong, fixing it. I had the great honour of becoming this country's chief prosecutor, leading an organisation, the Crown Prosecution Service. 3 very important words. Crown brings home the responsibility of leading part of the national legal system. Prosecution tells you that crime hurts and victims need justice to be done. Service is a reminder that the job is bigger than your own career advancement. I will always remember the day that John and Penny Clough contacted my office. Their daughter Jane was a nurse who had been the victim of terrible domestic abuse. After repeated assaults, Jane summoned the very great courage to report her partner. He was arrested and remanded in custody. But then, very much against the wishes of the Clough family, he was let out on bail. Jane lived in constant fear that he would return to harm her. She tried to ensure she never travelled to work alone. The one morning that Jane arrived at work unaccompanied, he was waiting for her in the hospital car park, where he stabbed her 71 times. When Jane's parents got in touch, my office advised me not to see them. You can't get emotionally involved in cases, they said. I replied, if I haven't got time to see the parents of a young woman who's just been murdered, then what am I doing in this job? On the day that John and Penny were supposed to come and see me, to tell me about the cruel murder of their daughter and how the criminal justice system had let them down, my own daughter was born. We had to push back the meeting. It was an incredibly emotional day for all of us. As I listened to John and Penny tell me Jane's story, I knew that a great injustice had been done. I made a promise to John and Penny at the end of that first meeting that I would work with them to make sure that no other family went through what they'd been forced to endure. And we rolled up our sleeves and we changed the law. I am delighted to say that John and Penny have become good friends of mine, and I am beyond honoured that they have joined us here today. Conference, John and Penny Clough. system. John and Penny taught me how to keep your dignity under severe pressure. Doreen Lawrence taught me the same lesson. Hers was a long battle for justice for Stephen, against the odds, confronting racism, but never giving up. Her courage and resilience over 28 years is impossible to describe in words. I honestly don't know how I would cope if anything happened to one of our children. I do know that I am humbled by John, by Penny, and by Doreen. And that is why, under my leadership, the fight against crime will always be a Labour issue. A Labour issue. Labour will strengthen legal protection for the victims of crime. We will not walk around the problem, we'll fix it. Conference, when I learned that 98% of reported rape cases don't end in a criminal charge, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it. I asked my team to check the figures. That can't be right, I said. But it was. Shocking. So we will fast-track rape and serious sexual assault cases, and we will toughen sentences for rapists, stalkers and domestic abusers. This is part of who we are, because it's part of what I am. Today, conference, I'm here to tell you what I stand for. But I'll also tell you what I won't stand for. I won't stand for 2 million incidents of antisocial behaviour this year. I won't stand for record levels of knife crime that we have in this country today. And I won't stand for 9 out of 10 crimes going unsolved. Under the Tories, the criminal justice system is close to collapse. There's never been a bigger backlog in the Crown Courts. After 11 years of Tory government, we have lost more than 8,000 police officers. They pretend it doesn't make any difference. It does. Ask the workers on the day shift at Tata Steel in Wolverhampton. They told me about the repeated incidents in their neighbourhood. Or the young women I recently saw in Stoke, who told me that they dare not go out in their high street alone. They see more violence and fewer police. It's just common sense to put the two together. The Tories are letting you down, and I can promise you that will never happen under my leadership. Conference, there's something else I took from a career in the law. and that's that there's one law and it applies to everyone. Now, I try to remain calm in the bear pit of parliamentary politics. I'm not a career politician. I came to politics late in life, and I don't much like point scoring. But the one thing about Boris Johnson that offends everything that I stand for is his assumption that the rules don't apply to him. When Dominic Cummings took a trip to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight, Boris Johnson turned a blind eye. When Matt Hancock breached his own lockdown rules, Boris Johnson declared the matter closed. When I got pinged, I isolated. When Boris Johnson got pinged, he tried to ignore it. That's not how I do business. When I was the chief prosecutor and MPs fell short of the highest standards on their expenses, I prosecuted those who had broken the law. Politics has to be clean. Wrongdoing has to be punished. Conference, there are times in this Parliament when I feel like I've got my old job back. Contracts handed out to friends and donors. The former Prime Minister lobbying the Chancellor by text. Refurbishing Number 10 with a loan from an anonymous donor. On behalf of the public that cares about clearing up politics, I put this government on notice. I've spent my entire working life trying to get justice done. In 2003, when I was working with the Policing Board of Northern Ireland, when I was learning up close just how hard it is to make a split-second life and death decision in a riot situation, as I worked with the police to create a lasting institution in accordance with the Good Friday Agreement, Boris Johnson was a guest on Top Gear, where, in reference to himself, he said to Jeremy Clarkson, "You can't rule out the possibility that beneath the elaborately constructed veneer of a blithering idiot lurks a blithering idiot." When, in the autumn of 2010, I was the chief prosecutor working with Doreen Lawrence to finally get a prosecution of the two men that murdered Stephen, Boris Johnson was writing an article in The Telegraph declaring a war on traffic cones. And when this country was threatened by terrorists who were trying to bring down planes with liquid bombs, I spent the summer of 2010 helping to put those terrorists behind bars where they could no longer pose a danger to British citizens. And whilst I was doing that, what were you doing, Mr. Johnson? You were writing a piece defending your right not to wear a cycle helmet. Conference, it's easy to comfort yourself that your opponents are bad people. I don't think Boris Johnson is a bad man. I think he's a trivial man. I think he's a showman. He's a showman with nothing left to show. He's a trickster who's performed his one trick. Once he'd said the words, get Brexit done, his plan ran out. There is. There is no plan. The questions we face in Britain today are big ones. How we emerge from the biggest pandemic in a century. How we make our living in a competitive world. The climate crisis. Our relationship with Europe. The future of our union. These are big issues, but our politics is so small. These times demand a responsible leader with clear values.
Where's Peter Mandelson?
From my dad, I understand the dignity of work. From my mum, I appreciate the nobility of care. From my work, the principle that we are all equal before the law. And from the victims of crime, that the law is there to make us secure. Work, care, equality, security. That's what I mean by justice. And that's what I've been aiming at all my working life. That's why I'm in politics. And those are the values this country needs as we first seek to recover from the pandemic. And then to look with excitement and anticipation at the path that beckons us to retool Britain for the future, to make this nation anew. I want to start with the importance of care. COVID-19 exposed the state of Britain 2020. After a decade of cuts and neglect, the health service wasn't ready. Just when the nation needed 4 nurses on its bed, sadly, they couldn't always be there. 1.6 million older people were going without the care they needed. GP numbers had tumbled. Waiting lists for treatment had spiralled. Then, on top of that, the government was fatally slow to respond. The Prime Minister's inability to make up his mind really mattered. Britain has the worst death toll in Europe. We have lost 133,000 people to COVID. Every one of them, somebody's mum, dad, sister, brother, friend. I know it was difficult, but the situation is worse than it needed to be. And it wasn't just a government failure over 18 months. It was a failure of the government's duty of care over 11 years. 11 years. There are cracks in British society and COVID seeped into them. Low earners were at greater risk. So were black and ethnic minority communities. COVID forensically found those who already had health problems, and it's left in its wake a significant backlog. NHS waiting lists are at the highest level on record. 5.5 million people are waiting for treatment. The great scandal of the pandemic was what happened in our care homes. And let me tell you this, conference, an unfair tax hike that doesn't fix social care and doesn't clear the NHS backlog is not a plan. We know that people will still be forced to sell their homes for care. Working people will have to pay more. but there's still no plan. A plan would prevent problems before they bite. A plan would provide care at home, where people are. A plan would ensure the workforce was properly valued. And a serious plan wouldn't be funded by hammering working people. There is no doubt that the NHS needs more money, and a Labour government will always fund the NHS properly. But the future of the NHS can't just be about chasing extra demand with more money, and neither can it be about reshuffling the furniture in yet another pointless reorganisation. We have to understand the big moment that the NHS faces. In 1900, the average British person expected to live to the age of 48. Today, average life expectancy is 80. The number of people aged 65 and over in this country is growing 3 times faster than the number aged under 65. That is a wonderful achievement, and the biggest test in the history of the NHS. No society in British history has been as old as our modern nations. Small politics will no longer do. I want Britain to be the healthiest nation on earth. So let me tell you what Labour would do. We would shift the priority of the NHS away from emergency care towards prevention. We can catch problems early, and at the same time we can use the resources of the NHS better. And I don't just mean physical illness either. With every pound spent on your behalf, we would expect the Treasury to weigh not just its effect on national income, but also its effect on well-being. Now, let me give you an example. One of the urgent needs of our time is mental health. Labour will guarantee that support will be available in less than a month. We will recruit the mental health staff that we need. Over 8,500 more mental health professionals supporting 1 million more people every year. Under Labour, spending on mental health will never be allowed to fall. And we'll make sure that children and young people get help early by ensuring that every school has specialist support and every community has an open access mental health hub. Conference. This is prevention in action, helping young people looking after their well-being. It's the principle my mum taught me, the principle of care. Let me give you a flavour of what care will look like in the future. I was at University College Hospital in London recently. An orthopaedic surgeon told me about a robot. This robot sits on the operating theatre, making sure every incision is just right. The surgeon can't go wrong because the robot works an override system, a bit like driving a car with a driving instructor. The doctor and the robot working together are so efficient that patients can be discharged a whole day early. Over time, that means thousands of hospital beds are freed up. The range of possibility is bewildering. Precision editing of the genome, will help us wipe out pathogens. The science of robotics and exoskeletons will help patients who are struggling to move. Virtual reality is being used to alleviate suffering of post-surgical pain. I could talk about this all day. I promise I won't. I don't pretend to understand all the medical science, but as politicians, we have to recognise the scale of what's happening and put the power of smart government behind it. That is what care will mean in the future. This is how health will be remade. And then we need to give our young people the tools of the future. Education is so important. I'm tempted to say it 3 times. When you don't invest in young people, the whole nation suffers, and the less fortunate get behind. By the time they finish their GCSEs, pupils from poorer families are 18 months behind their wealthier peers. That's right, 18 months. The pandemic showed that you can't trust the Tories with the education of our children. Children on free school meals going hungry. There was U-turn after U-turn on school closures. The attainment gap between rich and poor grew. The government asked Kevin Collins, a recognised expert in the field, to be their recovery czar. He told them what they needed to do, and they said no. When he saw the government plans, which he described as feeble, Mr. Collins had no option but to resign. If you can't level up our children, you are not serious about levelling up at all. And even before the pandemic, 200,000 children grew up in areas with not a single primary school rated as good or outstanding. Just think about that. Not a single primary school rated as good or outstanding. I want every parent in the country to be able to send their child to a great state school. On top of that, if you can believe it, 40% of young people leave compulsory education without essential qualifications. What does that say about their future? We will not put up with that. That is why Labour will launch the most ambitious school improvement plan in a generation, not walking around the problem, but fixing it. Under Labour, education will recover. But education needs to do more than just recover. It needs to be pointed in the direction I took from my dad, towards skill, towards work. Employers in all sectors tell me that they need well-rounded young people skilled in life, ready for work, young people who can communicate and work in a team. That's why it's stupid to allow theatre, drama and music to collapse in state schools. We want every child to get the chance to play competitive sport and play an instrument. When I was at school, I had music lessons with Fatboy Slim. I can't promise that for everyone, not even here in Brighton. But I can promise that Labour, as the name tells you, will make a priority of getting this country ready for work. That's why we will focus on practical life skills. We will reinstate 2 weeks of compulsory work experience, and we will guarantee that every young person gets to see a careers advisor. But conference, young people won't be ready for work or ready for life unless they are literate in the technology of the day. Fewer than half of British employers believe young people have the right digital skills. We do much worse in computer skills than most of our economic rivals. That is why Labour will write a curriculum for tomorrow. Reading, writing and arithmetic are the 3 pillars of any education. We would add a 4th, sadly it doesn't begin with R, digital skills. We need to ensure that every child emerges from school ready for work and ready for life. And conference. As in health, so too in education. We can work by the light of new technology. Machine learning can cater for individual work styles. Artificial intelligence can help tuition, especially for students with special needs. Cloud computing has brought the archive of the best that's been said and done to the handset of every student. There is so much possibility, and all we have to do is to learn to adapt. I think my dad might appreciate the technical term that's used for this change. It's known in the trade as retooling. And conference, what is the small Tory idea to respond to this change? They want to reintroduce Latin in state schools. So let me put this crisis in the only language that Boris Johnson will understand. Carpe diem. Seize the day. Seize the day. Finally, it's time to act, to educate our young citizens in the skills they need for work and the skills they need for life. A society that cares, an education system that fosters the skills, that's the foundation of an economy that works. In his great study, The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, David Landis explains why Britain was home to the first industrial revolution. The perfect home for growth, said Landis, had responsive, honest government. I'll say no more about that just at the moment. It tended to favour the new over the old, enterprise over conservatism. It spread the rewards evenly to make sure most of the talents were recognised all of the time. But the most important factor of all, the lesson we need to relearn, was that Britain led the world in the technology of the day. The flying shuttle, the spinning jenny, the power of the loom. These inventions were once the wave of the future. In textiles, iron, energy and power, Britain was a pioneer. I know that with Labour, we can do that again. But every day we waste, with a government with no industrial strategy, we're falling further behind. A scientific revolution is happening around us. But if we don't have a government ready to remake the nation, the opportunity will pass us by. Already, too many people are shut out of economic reward. We once took it for granted that our children would enjoy more than their parents. That idea drove my mum and dad. It comforted them that whatever the ups and downs of life, they were living in and contributing to a better society. But after 10 years of the Tories, we've lost this. We have 5.7 million people in low-paid and insecure work. Workers in transport, care, education and the utilities. These were the people who kept the show on the road during the pandemic. And their reward is continued low pay and job insecurity. The millennial generation, clustered in low-paid jobs, will be the first generation to have lower lifetime earnings than the one that went before. After a decade of the Conservatives, we have an economy with historically low rates of investment. Since 2010, in the Investment League of 170 nations, Britain comes in a miserable 150th. Labour will work with sectors which are strong: pharmaceuticals, materials, defence, chemical engineering, consumer goods, environmental technology, transport and biotechnology. Under Labour's Buy, Make and Sell in Britain programme, there will be more local procurement. The towns that were the crucibles of the original industrial revolution need to be revived in the next. The coal and cotton towns of Lancashire, the wool towns of Yorkshire, the great maritime and fishing economies of our seaports. These places made Britain the envy of the world. We cannot make the nation we want without them. The lesson is that a secure, well-paid workforce of skilled people in high-class work, protected by good trade unions, is not separate from good business. It is the definition of good business. And good business and good government are partners. I have no doubt that the small businesses of this country are the next generation wealth creators. I want to see enterprising, creative companies. I want to see them make a profit and employ more people. I want to create the conditions in which inventive small businesses can grow into inventive big businesses. But we don't give ourselves the best chance. I've lost count of how many business leaders have told me that they wish their time horizon could be longer. So when I say that Labour pledges to change the priority duty of directors to make the long-term success of the company the main priority, we will do it with the blessing of British business. A focus on the long term will allow for better investment. Labour will make Britain a world leader in science and research and development, And we will set a target to invest a minimum of 3% of GDP. This nation will not grow with the low wages, low standard, low productivity of the Tories. I'm determined we're going to change this by investing in our businesses, by unleashing our creativity, by bringing forward the New Deal for working people launched by Angela on Saturday. This is how we remake our nation. The good society and the strong economy as partners. Without a good society, we waste the talents of too many people. Without a strong economy, we cannot pay for the good society. Talk is cheap, but progress isn't. If we want permission to create the good society, we have to win trust that we will create a strong economy. The economic inheritance from the Tories will be appalling. A botched Brexit, followed by COVID, has left a big hole. The government is learning that it's not enough to get Brexit done. You need a plan to make Brexit work. I do see a way forward after Brexit. If we invest in our people and our places, if we deploy our technology cleverly, and if we build the affordable homes we so desperately need. But the public finances we inherit will need serious repair work. I take the responsibility of spending your money very seriously. That's why our approach to taxation will be governed by the three principles. The greater part of the burden should not fall on working people. The balance between smaller and larger businesses should be fair. And we will chase down every penny to ensure that people, working people paying their taxes, always get value for money. As Rachel said on Monday, all spending will be scrutinised by an Office for Value for Money. There will be no promises we can't keep or commitments we can't pay for. Too often in the history of this party, our dream of the good society falls foul of the belief that we will not run a strong economy. But you don't get one without the other. And under my leadership, we are committed to both. And I can promise you now, under my leadership, Labour will be back in business. Let me give you an example of how this template can work. Let's take the hardest question and the biggest issue of our time. Climate change. Climate change. This is an issue of security. It's a test of justice on a global scale. Climate change poses an existential threat. It will turn fertile terrain into desert land. Conflicts will break out over scarce resources like water. Millions will be displaced by flooding, forest fires and violent storms. Time is short and we have a duty to act. But that obligation shouldn't daunt us. It should embolden us. Shifting the economy onto a sustainable path is full of promise for Britain. Full of promise. Every time I enter a high-tech factory, I wonder what my dad would have made of it. Not so long ago, we shaped metal by drilling it, milling it, and turning it. I remember my dad working with a spark eroder, submerging metal in a liquid and using an electrical charge to shape it. We thought it was revolutionary at the time. But at Airbus recently, where they're developing the world's next hydrogen wing, I saw them working with 3D engineering, literally shaping components by bringing together particles and matter in a way completely unimaginable in the factory my dad used to work in. I saw young apprentices in a fully unionised factory, proud of the skilled work that they were doing. And their pride came from knowing that they were at the heart of a revolution, building the next generation of hydrogen and battery planes. They felt like pioneers of flight, perched on the edge of a cliff, taking the risk, knowing that success for one of them would change the world. In Scotland, I saw the great potential of wind power at Whiteley Wind Farm. Yet conference of the 250 wind turbines at Whiteley, not one of them was made in Britain. From their manufacturing base in Fife, the workforce can see the turbines literally being towed in from places like Indonesia. The next generation of deep-sea wind turbines could be our opportunity. Skilled engineering, offshore work, sectors where we could lead the world if only we had a government willing to lead. Public funding was an important component of so many inventions. The personal computer, the internet, the iPhone. If only we funded science seriously, we could make a historic contribution to the battle against climate change. Action is needed, not in the future, but now. If we delay action by a decade, the costs of climate transition will double. This urgency is why Labour will bring forward a Green New Deal. Our Green New Deal will include a climate investment pledge to put us back on track to cut the substantial majority of emissions this decade. And if we're serious about climate change, we need to upgrade our homes. The Tories inherited plans from Labour to make every new home zero carbon. They scrapped them. They scrapped them. And now we have a crisis in energy prices. Emissions from homes have increased. And we have the least energy-efficient housing in Europe. So it will be Labour's national mission over the next decade to fit out every home that needs it, to make sure that it is warm, well insulated and costs less to heat. And we'll create thousands of jobs in the process. I can also pledge that we will introduce a Clean Air Act. And everything we do in government will have to meet a net zero test to ensure that prosperity we enjoy does not come at the cost of our climate. And that's why on Monday, Rachel set out her ambition to become Britain's first Green Chancellor. Committing the next Labour government to an additional £28 billion of capital investment in our country's green transition for each and every year of this decade. Like those pioneers in flight, and like those young engineers working on the next generation plane, we have it within our grasp to make a historic difference. We have it within our grasp to be the change we need in the world. After a decade of Tory government, how we need that change. Under the Tories, wages have fallen in every English region. Local government has been cut to the bone. More than 500,000 more children live in poverty, and so do 500,000 more pensioners. For the first time in decades, life expectancy has stalled. And after all that, the Tories expect us to believe that levelling up is more than a slogan. Well, let me offer the Conservative Party a lesson in levelling up. If they want to know how to do it, I suggest they take a look at our record the last time we were in government. Hospital waits down, GCSO results up, 44,000 more doctors, 89,000 new nurses. Child poverty down 1 million, pensioner poverty down 1 million. Rough sleepers down 75%. A national minimum wage. Conference. The OECD said that no nation had had a bigger rise in social mobility than Britain. You want levelling up? That's levelling up. And you can see the benefit of Labour in power today. Look at what our fantastic metro mayors and local authority leaders are doing. And let's hear it for the difference Mark Drakeford and his team are making in Wales. I have a great relationship with Mark, but I fear that it's under threat. I believe in the union of the nations on these islands. But we have a cavalier government that's placing it in peril. Scotland is in the unfortunate position of having two bad governments. The Tories in Westminster and the SNP in Holyrood. When Nicola Sturgeon took office, she said she wanted to be judged on her record. Well, these days, with the poorest in society less well educated and less healthy, and with the tragedy of so many drug-related deaths, we hear rather less about the SNP's record. The SNP and the Tories walk in lockstep. They both exploit the constitutional divide for their own ends. Labour is the party that wants to bring our nations together. Under the fantastic leadership of Anna Sarwar, Labour is the party of the union. Because it's not just that divorce would be a costly disruption, although that's true. And it's not just that our union is in all our economic interests, though that is also true. It's that we're more progressive together. We are more secure together. We're a more bigger presence in the world together. We are greater as Britain than we would be apart. As Gordon Brown said recently, when a Welsh or Scottish woman gives blood, she doesn't demand an assurance that it must not go to an English patient. I'm delighted that Gordon will lead our Commission to settle the future of the Union. And I know that Gordon believes that if you look past the Tories' pathetic attempts to divide us in a culture war, you can glimpse a tolerant, progressive nation of which we can all be proud. I believe that our diversity is one of the things that makes this country great. As this country continues to change, as we slowly liberate the talents of more people, as we name and tackle discrimination, as we make a better place for people with disabilities, I believe we grow as a country. And when the government ignored Marcus Rashford's campaign on school meals, I was shocked. But I couldn't believe it when Rashford and the England team took the knee to highlight and condemn the racism that they had had to endure. The Home Secretary encouraged people to boo. Well, in this conference hall, we are patriots. When we discuss the fine young men and women who represent all our nations, we don't boo, we get to our feet and we cheer. Let me say a word too about another band of great British men and women. Our military put themselves in harm's way to protect our security. I am proud of them. And I'm proud of the work they did for us in Afghanistan. Thank you. It grieves me to see Britain isolated and irrelevant. Labour is the party of NATO, the party of international alliances. Under Labour, we will rebuild our alliances, we will mend broken relationships, and we will do right by the Great Britons who serve in our armed forces. I can see the ways in which we can remake this nation. And that's what we get to do when we win. In a way, the more we expose the inadequacy of this government, the more it presses the question back on us. If they're so bad, what does it say about us? Because after all, in 2019, we lost to them, and we lost badly. I know that hurts each and every one of you. So let's get totally serious about this. We can win the next general election. This government can't keep the fuel flowing. It can't keep the shelves stacked. And you've seen what Boris Johnson does when he wants more money. He goes straight to the wallets of working people. Labour is the party that's on the side of working people. So imagine, just imagine waking up the morning after the next election in the knowledge that you could start to write the next chapter in our nation's history, bending it towards the values that bring us year after year to this conference hall to seek a better way, proud in the knowledge that you were part of it. I have loved my first full conference as leader. I've really loved it. But I don't want to go through the same routine every year. In a few short years from now, I want to be here with you, talking about the difference we're making, the problems we're fixing as a Labour government. That is what this party is for. That is the object of the exercise. And as the leader of this party, I will always have that eye on the object look. How beautiful it is, that eye on the object look. This is a big moment, a time of rapid change. The first pandemic in a century, the aftermath of Brexit to sort out, the urgent claim of the climate, then our own domestic questions, providing a secure job that pays a decent wage, a good school nearby, health and social care that you can rely on, a home you can afford. This is a big moment that demands leadership. Leadership founded on the principles that have informed my life and with which I honour where I have come from. Work, care, equality, security. I think of these as British values. I think of them as the values that take you right to the heart of the British public. And that is where this party must always be. I think of these values as my heirloom. The word loom, from which the idea comes, is another word for tool. Work, care, equality, security. These are the tools of my trade, and with them, I will go to work. Thank you, Conference. Thank you, Conference. Thank you, Conference.
That was Keir Starmer, the Labour leaders' first in-person conference speech to the party faithful. They're all on their feet. It was a big speech, a long speech, partly because of the applause he received throughout and the cheering. There was heckling too, more of that in just a moment. I'd like to welcome viewers from the news channel to this BBC Politics Live programme covering the Labour Party conference in Brighton and Keir Starmer's speech. There's his wife Victoria joining him on the stage. I underestimated by quite some margin the length of the speech. I said it would be about an hour. In fact, it's been nearly an hour and a half, and that was in part because he was heckled. We talked about it actually just before we went into the auditorium to cover his speech. He was heckled, but he dealt with it pretty well. He responded from the lectern saying shouting slogans or changing lives. But there was something of a demonstration. We can see now those red cards being held up, even as he is being applauded, Keir Starmer. Red cards that were taken in by some of the delegates, clearly angry by what has happened, by some of the things this week. But overall, the conference floor rose to their feet many, many times. The shadow cabinet again applauding him loudly because he had a very big speech to deliver. It was a very big moment for him. He talked about his upbringing, where he came from, the dignity of work, his parents, his mum and dad, and also his past life as the Director of Public Prosecutions, and that actually led him to talk about justice and the fact that fighting crime should be a Labour issue. His comments about Boris Johnson, interestingly, were about the fact he said that the Prime Minister doesn't think that the rules apply to him, and he put this government on notice. He said Boris Johnson is a trickster. He's trivial, a showman with nothing left to show. A slightly different approach to perhaps what we've heard in the past to Boris Johnson. He very much wants to paint himself as a serious politician in serious times, in stark contrast to the Prime Minister. Well, there he is, being feted by the party faithful as he walks through the auditorium. I said that we would be speaking to his deputy, Angela Rayner, which we will do in about 10 or 15 minutes' time, and get her reaction. He, of course, mentioned her, and other Labour leaders. Anna Sarwar, the Labour leader in Scotland, Mark Drakeford, the First Minister of Wales. Let's, though, talk to our chief political correspondent, Adam Fleming. Adam, first of all, your impressions of the speech.
Do you know what? It's making me think of the new James Bond film. We've had to wait a few years for it to finally arrive. It's quite long, but it's going to get good reviews, I think.
It's also the last appearance, I think, though, isn't it, of Daniel Craig?
Stretch the metaphor into speculation.
Yeah. Maybe we should just leave that. I mean, is Keir Starmer, did he show himself to be a Prime Minister in waiting?
Look, we saw a funnier Keir Starmer, a Keir Starmer who's better at rhetoric. We saw a more emotional Keir Starmer. So we've definitely learned a lot more about him. And we saw him handle those hecklers pretty well. And I think he and his team will actually be counterintuitively really pleased that he got heckled, because you know what it does? It dramatises the fight he's been having behind the scenes at this conference all week, which is to push out what he would call the far left, the supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. And Jeremy Corbyn's supporters and sympathisers who did heckling dramatised it for him.
Right, and again, does this in a way draw a line underneath the Jeremy Corbyn era? I mean, there were a couple of very clear statements, even though he didn't mention him by name. Labour will never again go into an election with a manifesto that isn't a serious plan for government. We can hear, by the way, the Labour Anthem there in the background. He got a standing ovation for that. He said, we've got to get our own house in order, and we have done that this week.
Yeah, so you're right that he didn't mention the C name, Jeremy Corbyn, by name, but there was all sorts of little deadly references to him. Quite near the start of the speech, he was saying to the activists, thank you very much for what you did in the 2019 election, because you saved this party from obliteration. In other words, if it had solely been down to Jeremy Corbyn, there might not be a Labour Party today. And then compare that with the other person he didn't name explicitly, Tony Blair, when he made a little reference to that famous education speech. And that got a clap in the hall. For the last few years, the words Tony and Blair have been banned in this place.
Yes, you're right. That has changed in terms of tone and atmosphere. We're just going to test the temperature, to use that cliche, outside the hall as delegates are leaving. We can hear and see them behind us. Nick Watt, Newsnight's political editor, is there. Nick.
Thank you, Joe. I'm at the bottom of the stairs and I'm now joined by Laura Pidcock, seen as one of the stars of the Labour left. Your thoughts, Laura Pidcock, on that speech?
It was long, wasn't it? It was a long speech. Look, he hasn't been able to give a speech in front of people for a long time, but I didn't think that was his moment. I thought it was quite uninspiring. We thought there might be some kind of olive branch to members of the party. I think Angela's standing here as some kind of tactic to make me say something different, and I won't. I didn't really hear many commitments in his speech. And that's disappointing, because there is a crisis facing working.
Laura Pidcock, can I ask you, what did you think of those heckles during Keir Starmer's speech?
Yeah, well, as I said to you just before, I think there is discontent amongst the membership, and that sometimes spills out into those important moments.
Heckling just after Keir Starmer had talked about his mother was gravely ill in hospital, and heckling after that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that wouldn't be appropriate. I didn't experience that in the hall. I didn't know that that had happened. Of course, I share an experience with him. My own father was also in intensive care, so I connect with him. I connected with him in that moment, but yeah, members feel deeply aggrieved about how they've been treated.
Thank you, Laura.
And he needs to speak to working class voters, but yeah, thanks for that.
Thank you, Laura Pidcock. So, Joe, we've now got Angela Eagle, who did challenge for Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership. What did you think of that speech?
I thought it was a speech that showed that we're focused on winning the election, that dealt with the concerns that the British people have. No petrol in the pumps, Shelves in the supermarkets empty.
But you clearly weren't happy with what you heard from Laura Pidcock there, a key figure on the left. What did you think of that heckling?
I thought that it was petulant and small and very disappointing. I think that the party needs to work together. There's only a small number of people now that feel they have to behave like that, and I'm sorry that that happened. I think it was disrespectful. But the bigger picture is that the Labour Party is focused on winning the general election.
Focused on winning the general election. Look, you have a competent lawyer, but do you have somebody who can inspire, who can connect? That's the big question.
I think what Keir did today was try to explain to the British people where his values come from and what will concern him when he's in Downing Street. And I think the speech did that very effectively. The policies in detail, we've seen some of them this week. More will come, but I think the country needs to know what this man's values are, the decency, the hard work, what he understands about the sufferings and difficulties that ordinary people experience, and he got that across very well today.
Angela Eagle, thank you. Well, there you are, Joe. We have two leading lights on either wing of the Labour Party. Laura Pidcock, of course, lost her seat in Durham in the general election, and Angela Eagle, who did, of course, challenge Jeremy Corbyn for the leadership.
Nick, thank you very much. Adam, two very contrasting reactions to the speech. As we heard there, Laura Pidcock, of course, who was a leading light when Jeremy Corbyn was leader, and Angela Eagle, who is a fairly veteran Labour MP, if you like, saying that they are preparing for government. But it was interesting that Laura Pidcock said that Keir Starmer could have offered an olive branch to her wing of the party.
Oh, he's not interested in that because they're staging a war against the Corbynites because Keir Starmer wants to vanquish them. But what's clear from that little exchange there's still quite a lot of them here, so the vanquishing hasn't happened yet. So they're going to be a thorn in his side, and there'll be versions of those heckles as long as he's leader of the Labour Party.
And as you say, that could be a good thing for him in terms of asserting his authority. Do you think he will feel that he has asserted his authority over the party?
I think he will, but I think what will matter is when people watch the news tonight, do they see a tougher guy than they thought was there standing up to some people causing trouble in his own backyard, or do they see a party that's a bit of a rabble and therefore shouldn't be trusted with the levers of government? Up to the public to decide.
Well, and that phrase that he used in the interview with Laura Kuenssberg, that winning is more important than unity, and obviously he will want to hold true to that. And perhaps that was demonstrated clearly in the hall as he looks on the prize of fighting the Conservatives.
Yeah, and there was some very good gags at Boris Johnson's expense, and actually we can talk about one of them with our next guest, because rather than saying that Boris Johnson is a bad guy, he said that he's a trivial guy, which I thought was a much more subtle way of attacking the Tories than some people have been doing it here in Brighton this week.
All right.
I don't know how long the policies will last in the memory, though. I think the heckles might last longer.
You reckon? Well, let's talk about that with Angela Rayner. Here she is, straight out of the hall, the deputy leader of the Labour Party. On those heckles, shouting slogans or saving lives, he said to the conference and those people shouting out. What's your message to people shouting at him while he was trying to deliver his speech?
Well, I think, Keir was doing a fantastic speech. I think, he was really, for me, the passion that Keir got over about why he does what he does, informing him that his mum was a nurse, his dad was a toolmaker.
But they heckled. There were people in the audience then heckling as he was talking about his mum as a patient.
Yeah, and that's, that wasn't great. It was awful. But, the audience, the vast majority of the audience was very clear that they wanted to hear Keir's message. And then not only did they want to hear it, but they wanted more because they really loved what he had to say. Because what it was about, for me, it mixed the substance of what drives Keir's values and the emotional connection that a lot of people says that I overshare, Keir undershares, but actually people saw today that balance that he has, that seriousness that he brings to the job, and what he thinks is the work of him is that he needs to challenge this government that have failed to look after working people in this country and make things better for people who have got us through this pandemic.
It's interesting, you're talking about him in a very different way to what we heard from you in the wake of the local elections, when you said people didn't know what he stood for. Have you changed your mind?
Absolutely, it's not a different way. The challenge was, because of the global pandemic, me and Keir took over as leader and deputy leader at a very different time, difficult time. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Difficult time, I know. There's cheers now up and down down the country, I can hear them. But, you know, it was a difficult time for the country. So, therefore, it was difficult then for us to be able to set out our message at a time of global pandemic. So I felt Keir hadn't really been given the chance or the opportunity. I think now what people saw was Keir the man, what drives him, and also Keir the Prime Minister in waiting, and what he'd do for this country and for working families across this country. And I'm inspired by that, you know.
So you are inspired now? You think he's found the passion that you obviously thought was lacking?
Yeah, because, you know, Keir is a guy that you literally would trust your house, your kids and everything else, because he's a guy that actually says, look, I'm not going to do all the, you know, the glitzy glamour. I'm going to do the forensic analysis that will deliver for working families across this country. I absolutely want him as Prime Minister. I think he'll be absolutely tremendously great for this country, especially when you think of where we are at the moment. And you know, Keir mentioned in speech, this is a serious point. You know, post-Brexit, the money and the finances and the difficulties we face with the pandemic, these are going to be difficult, serious times for us when we next face a next general election.
He didn't mention Jeremy Corbyn by name, and those hecklers would probably say they were supporters of the former Labour leader. Do you think he buried Corbynism at this conference and in that speech?
I think Keir Starmer took over the Labour Party back when he was elected, when we both
and
took over.
And is the era of Corbyn over?
But that's what happens, people move on. But do you know what? The era of our values, our Labour values, that speak for working people in this country is what we care about. And I've said this, you know, in all of the divisions that we've ever had in the Labour Party, I've said there's never been a Labour leader that I've not grappled with at some point on a particular issue.
But you say you'd never turn away from Jeremy Corbyn.
I challenged Jeremy at times as well, but Jeremy was our previous leader, and now we've got Keir Starmer. And Keir Starmer, I think, set out a very bold, forensic vision, and I think it was a very secure vision for the future of our country.
So did you accept what Keir Starmer said, that the last Labour manifesto was not a serious plan for government?
Well, I think you've got to recognise that we got absolutely hammered at the last general election. You know, my majority was significantly reduced in my own constituency.
So Keir Starmer's right, it wasn't a serious plan, it was what you stood on, of course.
We failed to win government, and I think what was important about what Keir said in the speech today, and he's made no bones about it, we are a party not of protest, but a party of government, and that's what Keir is setting out today, and I think that's absolutely right. We have to draw a line out. We have to recognise when we lost and why we lost, more importantly.
One of the important parts of the speech was what Keir Starmer said about Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, and he described him as a trickster. He said he was trivial, but he said it was a mistake to say that he is a bad man. You described the Tory government and Boris Johnson as scum. Do you accept that Keir Starmer does not agree with you in the terms that you used?
One thing that everybody knows is me and Keir are very different personalities, but the passion and the way in which, if you hear Keir Starmer there talk about how Boris Johnson has lied, how he's not been up to the job, how he's been too late coming to the big issues that we face, the security of our country.
But is that the right language to use to describe the Tory government?
He talked about the care homes, and for me, you know, I said at a post-Watershed meeting of activists that actually, if you make racist comments, seriously damaging racist comments in our country. Keir mentioned the way in which our footballers were treated. If you make sexist comments and homophobic comments, then you should apologise for it. And I've said I'm happy to meet with Boris Johnson and explain why I believe his damaging language has been horrendous.
Would you apologise to him? If you did meet with Boris Johnson, would you apologise to him?
I will have a conversation with him and I will tell him why I feel that what he said is completely abhorrent. And then if he's willing to accept that and apologise, I will accept for my language and tone in which I described him. Because you've got to understand that when people are facing racism every day in this country, and then you've got a Prime Minister who has said the most outrageously racist things and never apologised, people feel pretty bad about that.
You did apologise last year when you used that same term. Why did you apologise then and you're not apologising yet now?
I apologise for using unparliamentary language in Parliament. Like I say, I was at a post-Watershed event in the evening, and the point being, and this is really crucial for me, I've been, you know, I understand people are upset by that language. I do understand that. That's me, I'm bombastic, and I apologise if it offended the public in the way in which I expressed it. But people were more outraged by me saying that than looking into Boris Johnson's racism, misogynism and homophobia. That's our Prime Minister of this country. For me to even level that accusation, I think is pretty serious.
All right,
and he needs to answer to it.
There are lots of delegates here listening to you, talking to us on the BBC. You said that Jeremy Corbyn would be the next Prime Minister. Are you happy here to say that you think and know that Keir Starmer will be?
Absolutely, because I mean, this government we've got now promised so many things and didn't deliver. What Keir said is that he will do exactly what needs to be done to win over the country.
Including dropping the pledges that he stood on in his leadership campaign.
It's not about placards or pledge cards. It's about the public and winning the public's vote to get into government. That's what we're interested in. And you've seen Green New Deal, you've seen education, all the things that I was talking about before, and it's about making sure that we're on the key issues. Far too many things. People didn't believe we could deliver it. Keir's forensic in what we can deliver in government.
I think we have to let you go at this point, but just one final question on the £15 per hour minimum wage. Do you still stand by that?
Look, what I want to see, and I make no bones, we always want more in the movement. I did as a trade unionist. We always want, and we should always push for that. But when we get to our Clause 5 meeting, before a general election for our manifesto, we will look at it in the round and we'll make sure that we have the best package for working people. That's my promise.
Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. Thank you very much for joining us here on set. Adam, your thoughts on what you heard?
Do you know what's just struck me? Everyone on Twitter and social media is kind of joking about the length of the speech. And of course, that doesn't matter to most people, but apart from our dear viewers who've stayed with us all the way through this. But you then suddenly realise, does it actually tell you a slight problem Keir Starmer's got? That was a really long speech, loads of references to Labour history, quoting very august tomes about the history of Britain. But we're in an era of where politics is done through memes.
Oh, right. Well,
and it's like, actually, is that something that Keir Starmer is going to struggle with? Like, he can't sort of consolidate his vision into a short little kind of bumper sticker. I mean, because how do you summarise that as a bumper sticker or a meme?
Right.
You may hate that that's the way the modern world is, but we're not really in a world where people have 2 hours to sit and listen to a speech. And is that going to be Keir Starmer's problem?
Well, it may well be. You did listen to it throughout, along with me. Take us through a couple of the very big policy announcements.
Yeah, so some of them have been announced in advance, and we've been talking about them all morning. So, for example, a new target that people that need treatment for mental health will get it within a month. That will be done through recruiting more people into the NHS. That taking away the tax breaks for private schools, that will pay for thousands and thousands of new teachers to have more outstanding schools more evenly spread across the country. There's a pledge to spend 3% of GDP, so national income, on scientific research, and there's going to be a national mission to insulate hundreds and hundreds of thousands of homes over the next decade, which is going to be very expensive.
Thank you very much for that. Let's welcome Kim Leadbeater, Labour MP for Batley and Spen.
Hello.
Looking very buoyed. This was your first conference since you were elected as an MP. How do you feel?
I feel really good. It's such a positive vibe, and just speaking to people, there's a real buzz about the place. So I think, even though I couldn't be here for the whole thing, I've really loved being here today.
Now, of course, you represent Batley and Spen. It was the constituency of your sister, Jo Cox. She was murdered. It's very courageous, many people would say. That must feature when you come to a gathering like this.
Of course it does. I mean, you know, ultimately my story is my story, and I'm Jo's sister, and I'll always be Jo's sister, and I'll always be incredibly proud to be Jo's sister. But what I hope and what I believe is that the people of Batley and Spen elected me for me, and it's Kim now doing the job, and I think that's really important that I make my own mark.
Right. What did you hear? What did you hear that really struck you? I know it was a long speech, but what grabbed you?
There was a lot going on there, wasn't there?
There really
He's been building
was.
that for 18 months. I was like, goodness me, he's getting his money's worth, which is good because I'm from Yorkshire and that's important. I mean, I love the stuff on education. I love the stuff on broadening education. I think the idea of getting kids access to music lessons, to sport, to drama, that was really powerful. The Green New Deal stuff is clearly really important. We've got the climate crisis. We've got to engage with young people. That's a really massive, important issue to them. So what are we going to do about insulating homes? You know, how can we drive things forward in that regard? And I think, you know, the biggest thing is that now we've got a vision. We've got something that we can coalesce around and build on and move forward.
So were you surprised that people were heckling?
There was only a little bit of heckling, wasn't there? I mean, I think you'd probably get that at any big event like that.
Well, it was quite dramatic, and we had talked about him sort of preparing for it. I mean, there would be many people in there who thought it was inappropriate, and others who...
I think it's wholly inappropriate. I mean, I think just because it's common doesn't make it acceptable. You know, and do you know what, for me, and I find this in Parliament, actually, it's just about manners. When someone's speaking, you let them speak. So I do feel quite strongly about that. But ultimately, you know, you've got a room full of people, there's a lot of energy in the room, so, you know, it is what it is.
There was a lot of energy in the room. Do you think Keir Starmer's got the passion, the inspiration, because there's been a lot of talk that he is perhaps a little understated in his whole manner?
Do you know what? I really do, actually. And what I think he's got on top of that is the integrity and the sincerity to get the job done. And if you compare him to Boris Johnson, who, you know, I've spent a few hours now in Parliament, in PMQs, and it's all show, and it is all just bluster, and it's all just saying what people want to hear. There's no substance behind it. And you know, Keir is such a compassionate man. I was sat next to this amazing couple whose daughter was murdered, sat next to Doreen Lawrence. You know, he's helped those people during his career, and that's the kind of man he is. And maybe that doesn't come across in sound bites and fancy jigging around. I can do that. But you know, but that's the kind of person he is, and that's what we need to lead this country.
I mean, that was the contrast he wanted to make, Adam, that he's a serious politician, in contrast to Boris Johnson. And do you think he did deal with that atmosphere in the hall when it did get a little liquid?
Well, I've just been called out by someone from Keir Starmer's office to say there is a bumper sticker version of the speech. It's 2 words. It's Britain remade.
OK.
So that's the bumper sticker.
Well, there you go. Do you mean to say that could have been condensed into those 2 words?
Yeah, I could have saved all this time. What I thought was interesting, though, about the construction of the speech, think about what the themes have been at party conferences in the last few years. For years after the financial crisis, the economy. During Brexit, that crisis, it was about Brexit. Keir Starmer spent about 40 minutes talking about crime, justice, his legal background, because that is how he defines himself, and that is how he's trying to present himself to the country. And actually, you just think you don't actually hear him talking about crime that much, even though it is basically his strong card.
And actually, that's what matters to people. You know, when I was door knocking the by-election, they're concerned about antisocial behaviour, they're concerned about, you know, speeding traffic. That's what people are concerned about. So I think going heavy on crime is not a bad thing at this stage.
Because you said it was Labour's issue. Do you think it would be the #1 issue? You talked about education, and obviously he echoed the past under Tony Blair with education, education, education. Is that a positive for you?
I think that is a positive, yeah. I think it is. I mean, anything talking about education is a positive. But, you know, we can't just have one issue. We've got to cover the whole spectrum, haven't we? So it's got to be crime, it's got to be education, it's got to be the climate.
If crime is so important, Kim, why did they vote against the police and crime bill in Parliament before you were an MP?
Before I was an MP, before my time, so I've got a bit of a get-out.
Don't give her the get-out jail-free card.
But you would have voted against it if the by-election had been earlier.
You know, now I need to look forward, and I think that's what today's been about. It's been about a vision for the future, and I think that's what Keir did really, really well. And I think we take that energy now from today. We move forward on all those important issues that matter to people.
In terms of approach, we talked with Angela Rayner, of course, because of the comments that she made about the Tory government and about Boris Johnson. Where are you? Would you like to hear more of that sort of fiery, controversial language in terms of taking on the Tories, or Keir Starmer's approach?
I think you can be passionate without being offensive, and I think that's really important. I mean, gosh, I'm a very strong, feisty northern woman, as is Angela, and I think that's a real strength. But I think we do have to be careful about the language we use across the political spectrum. So I think, you know, you can still get the passion across, and you can still call out bad behaviour without using language that I probably wouldn't use.
All right. I mean, the battle between the leadership and the left has dominated to some extent. How do you think they'll leave today, the leadership, after this conference and after that speech?
Oh, relieved and very happy, I think, yeah.
You think they will feel that they have actually achieved something with the rule changes?
I think so.
Were they necessary, those rule changes?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think so. This is about moving forward, isn't it? Yeah, and it's about getting the party in a position to face the electorate. And that's what those rule changes will enable us to do now. And I think that's really important.
Right. I mean, there were lots of people who are obviously very unhappy about what actually happened and that it wasn't necessary and the party was looking internally rather than to the voters.
Well, I think those changes now enable us to look externally, and I think that's what's really important. And I think, you know, obviously this is what conference is about. It's about ironing out those issues. And I think the place that we got to in the end is where we need to be. And now it is about getting out there into the wide world and speaking to the electorate.
Right.
Well, also, just one other thing. I thought one thing that was quite clever was the very short line on Brexit, that the new policy is make Brexit work. Guess what? That combines being pro and anti-Brexit, something this party has agonised over for the last 5 years. Maybe they've struck on a magic formula now that gets them through the next 5.
And they're going on a tour, aren't they, him and Lisa Nandy? Anyway, more of that on another scene. That's all we have time for here in Brighton at the Labour Party conference, Keir Starmer's speech in 2021. Bye-bye.